for Atlanta. So.
For LRA.
LRA, 32 hours.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's impressive. I don't know that I could do that.
From what perspective?
I just don't know that I'm going to conferences ever again.
Oh. No.
I mean, I will at some point, but right now I'm okay.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay.
Totes.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a 6-year stint when I went maybe to one conference every other year. And it was fine. Nobody died.
Kind of feels like the age that I am in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But there is something interesting about because I have taken kind of a COVID-inspired extended leave from conferences, there is this but are you an academic if you're not going to conferences and presenting? And so that's been interesting to navigate, because it does somewhat interestingly create a sense of, am I impostering? Right? Within academia.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it from the opposite way. And that is, I think that, which is a totally different argument than yours, but one of the places you can learn not to feel like an imposter is at conferences.
Yeah, I can see that too.
So it's a cure, but it's also part of the problem. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot there.
There's an interesting symbiotic relationship there.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps us segue into what we're going to talk about today on Not That Kind of Doctor. I'm Nick Huseby. I'm an associate professor of elementary literacy education here at UNL.
And I'm Guy Training. I'm a professor of education here at UNL.
And I think every single academic that I know has been impacted by an imposter phenomenon at one point or another, right? Like this idea of not really having a sense of being as competent as other people, as not being, not belonging to certain spaces, right? Which we talked about maladaptive perfectionism in our students in a previous episode. But when we're thinking about imposter syndrome for particularly grad students, right? And even early career, mid-career, late career scholars, right? There's this self-perceived competence gap, right? That can make you feel a bit like I'm a fraud.
Yeah. And it is self-perceived up to a point. I would like to argue that there's a lot that happens in academia that is consistently feeding that sense of being an imposter, because academia has the original social media, and that is the publication world is like Instagram, in that you see people's best work. You don't see anything that never got published. Right. You just see the published. You see the things that were published after 4, 5, maybe more rounds of corrections and comments and improvements. So you're taking that and you're taking your manuscript you just sent in that just got rejected, and you're always comparing it. So in a sense, the system is built with feeding that sense that we're inadequate, because there's a lot of rejection. Most of the journals we submit to have a rejection rate between 5 and 20%. 20% is really a good number for us.
Rejection or acceptance?
Acceptance.
Acceptance. Okay.
Acceptance. So, between 1 out of 20 to 1 out of 5 is where most journals fall. And 1 out of 5 is really good. But that means that even with that 20%, 80% gets rejected, at least in first read, which means that this is the normal state of affairs, is to be rejected. But when you get that rejection, you feel it. You feel like you failed to a certain degree. You learn to deal with that, and that's part of growing in the profession. But definitely early on, it feels devastating. I work with a lot of young scholars. As I mentor them through first publications, especially, we talked about this before, through their dissertation work. And they get their revise and resubmit, and the sense is, I have completely failed. What have I been doing? I need to find a different career. And the answer is, not so fast.
You got to revise and resubmit.
That is the whole point. They're telling you they want to see it again. That is a win. But it feels like a loss.
A
So
loss.
the system is really built to do that all the time. And we also have, and informally we've talked about it just recently, we also have a system that is very tiered. There are top institutions that are really trying to create that separation. And we fight for students. So we do try to create the separation based on how highly you're rated, on some kind of ranking or another, and we can get into ranking another time. But there's definitely a sense of tiers within the system and people placing them and talking about their institution, especially if they come from one of those top tiers. And they are really making those distinctions about where you work and what you do based on that. And that helps that as well. It's like, yeah, I'm in this conference with everybody else, going back to conferences, but am I part of the in crowd? Even at the conference, it's easy to feel like you're on the out. And so that's really always there. And I do believe that even the people who go to those big institutions and all of that have imposter syndrome at one point or another, because we all get rejected. We all have all of these things happen to us.
Well, and I think I'm not in this situation, but like I remember talking to Jennifer Rousel about imposter syndrome, and she was like, I feel like an imposter all the time. I have all of these articles, all these books, all these grants. I am endowed a chair, et cetera, et cetera, et
When
cetera.
do you stop feeling like an imposter?
And I don't know that. I think there are certain things that you can do in order to negotiate those feelings of imposter syndrome, because there's a lot of structural stuff, there's a lot of social stuff that comes into play, right? And even outside of academia, just writ large, when I was researching for this episode, I came across the statistic of 82% of people just writ large have imposter syndrome at some point in time, right? Experience an imposter phenomenon. And so it becomes really, really important, I think, for us as academics, for a variety of reasons, to be aware of and think through how to negotiate when we experience imposter phenomena, right? Like what is happening there? When is that going? So I'm kind of, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about like times where I've experienced imposter syndrome. I would love to know about times you've experienced imposter syndrome, because there's probably multiple points in your career, if you're like me, but you are perfect. So you're never an imposter.
I think that anytime you are fairly new to a situation, whether you get a new job or you take on a new role, for a while you feel like an imposter. And I think that is connected to how we behave inside the system. There's a language to these systems, right? So when you come to a new institution, all the people that are already there know there's just the local knowledge, and you're new, and that feels like you don't belong. And often, although it doesn't have to lead to an imposter syndrome, it can, right? Obviously, I have not learned anything in my previous jobs that prepared me for this, and I feel like I'm pretending, right? That's at the heart of this. I'm pretending to be somebody I'm actually not. And that can drive you to a certain degree, but that can also be a very hard feeling to deal with. So that's one space. Every time you start something new, every time you interview, I think, we talked a lot about interviews, you suddenly go back and say, I thought I knew my stuff, but now I'm not feeling that confident. And so that's another one of these moments. And definitely when you get a lot of rejections, which is, again, part of the course. You are literally going to get more rejections than acceptances. It's just built into the system. But there's a moment where you're like, when it accumulates sometimes, it can feel that way. And those are moments, and I have lots of these moments. As somebody who came from another country, there's that layer on top of this that is always there. And helps you negotiate this. I mean, there are ways to negotiate this, but there's always a certain amount of, for example, when I talk about to talk about American culture and history, and we talked a lot about when we talked about DEI and all of these things. We're talking about history that isn't my history.
Mm-hmm.
So there's even a sense of being an imposter when you talk about these things, because it's like, who is the us, right? Did we do this? We as a country definitely did. I wasn't here. My family wasn't here. So there's these moments where you feel like, how much of this can I take on? And that feels there are moments there as well. So lots of that.
Well, and I think that like thinking through that DEI perspective, right? I feel like that's something that so many people wrestle with. Is this is a where DEI work is really wrestling with historical injustices, and so what is our role in that if given our contemporary moment, right? Like I wasn't particularly involved in those injustices.
Yes.
Right. So I feel like a lot of times there are those imposter kind of feelings around that's important work, but am I being an imposter because I'm not responsible to adjusting and rethinking systems in order to ameliorate some of what's happened in the past, right? So there's that too. There's tons of ways
that you can feel like
an imposter.
Points to academia, yes.
Right. Like even we had recently on our Facebook page, I think it was, we were highlighting student teachers. Because our student teachers are finishing up. It's the last week in November as we're recording this. So our student teachers are wrapping up their semester-long student teaching experience. And so they were highlighting strong student teachers. And one of them called out my lit block class as like their favorite class in the program. And my first thought was, oh, she must not have been able to think of any other classes.
Instead of thinking, I am awesome, this was a foundational experience for them.
Well, and the more I thought about it, like, so, because I think Jillian Harpster was the one who was like, oh, you got to mention on Facebook. And I was like, I don't have a Facebook. I don't know what's going on. And so then I was thinking about it on the way home on the bus, like, and I was like, I'm invalidating my student's opinion.
Yes.
I need to not do that.
Yes.
I don't have to be comfortable with it. Because there's some like, ooh, was it that great? Like I keep thinking of all the things that I could have done differently that semester. And I think that's just part of the teaching.
Yeah.
Right? You always have things that you can do better, but you always have to keep them in perspective. And sometimes that perspective is difficult to support in your own brain. But like, it was an objective measure that I just needed to take at face value and value it for what it was. I had a student who was of the opinion that my class was a highlight of her program, and I need to be okay with that.
And that connects to the fact that it is easier for us, for whatever reason, we can go into brain research, but the bottom line is it's much easier for us to pay attention to the one negative comment or negative experience or that one thing we're like, we could have done this better, versus paying attention to the overwhelming positive feedback. And I'm thinking about teaching, and that is, I and almost everybody else I know, when they teach, will pay attention to the one student who gave negative comments, but not to the 25 students who gave really positive comments.
Right.
It's like, how did I miss this? And we have this heavy feeling, and am I really doing the work? And this requires that rethinking. It's like, why am I thinking this? How can I think about this differently without invalidating? Because a negative opinion is also something you need to validate, right? There's a student I, for whatever reason, was not able to reach. And I need to think about this better, but I cannot let this become the only way I think about the class I just finished teaching. And the one thing I love about class, about teaching is in the moment of teaching, in that flow of teaching. Those are the moments where I feel the least like an imposter, because I'm like, oh, I do know some stuff. There's some knowledge there. I have deep knowledge in some areas that I can share with willing students, and we can really bring them to what they need to know so they are able to be, and in our case, it's really fantastic because we're educating teachers, whether they're pre-service teacher or in-service teachers, to be able to do something better with the kids they're working with, and make their lives both easier and more complete and more and by that transfer to children and community. Those moments I cherish. It's when you get that distance and suddenly you have a comment, whether it's in student evaluations or a random comment, or that invitation. We have invitations to the students who appreciate you, and we get a parent award, and all of these moments. Those are moments to celebrate, but there's more distance. It allows us to rethink, and sometimes not positively.
Yeah, which is just fascinating. It's something I've noticed about my own thinking around being an imposter and trying to negotiate that. And I think my sense of how I sometimes will construct myself as an imposter has shifted and changed across my career, right? Like, if you're a grad student, of course, you're one of the things that you're trying to do is establish a professional identity. And so part of it really is kind of faking it until you make it. Really. And figuring out, like, what are the professional activities that you're engaging in, and what kind of scholar, what kind of academic you want to be. And I think that is, when it comes down to what kind of scholar do you want to be, what kind of teacher, what kind of academic, that's really important. That idea of, I hate to say this because it feels so kind of gross at times, but what's your brand? You know, like, what is the brand that you are trying to put forth in the world is really, really important in thinking through that imposter syndrome, right? Because when you think through, this is what I am about, this is what I want my career to be about, then, and we'll talk a little bit more about ways to negotiate that later, but that branding becomes not only a tool you can use to figure out where to place your energies, where to place your resources, but it also gives you some sense of internalized a set of metrics against which you can, when you're feeling like an imposter, okay, but are you being true to who you are? And is that just a mismatch, right? Like, are you an imposter, or are you just in a new space, right? And I think also one of the things that I wish we did better. I wish we did this better for adult learners. But giving people space and permission to suck at things for a while. Right? Because
that's a necessary step.
It's a necessary step in learning how to do anything.
Yes.
And as adults, we don't do that particularly well. I don't feel like we expect
perfection from the get-go.
Perfection, like, right away. Like, what would a scarf look like if you started knitting right now?
Yes.
Right? So, like, part of people always ask me, like, can you teach me how to knit? Yes, but it's going to take a year.
Yes. And it's going to be painful.
You're going to suck at it for a year. Are you willing to do that?
And there is a tool that I found really useful in my work, especially more recently, and that is, I find that art is a great way to negotiate with that. Knitting would be an art, because there are two aspects. That is, there's the picture in your head, and then there's what happens in reality when it's a
Right.
physical exercise. And I think the physicality of it is actually a really good metaphor because people get that immediately. Whereas in our brain, we should be able to teach a lesson perfectly the first time we teach it, the way we saw it in our head. It never happens.
Never happens.
But you have that picture in your head. And so, and in art, much like knitting, it's exactly the same way. I know exactly what I want to create. And then I'm working with the paper mache or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And it doesn't look even anything close to that. And there's something glorious about learning to accept that. And that, again, connects to our previous episode about perfectionism, because that helps you deal with that. It's never going to look like what you want.
Mhm.
And that's an emotion you've got to learn to deal with in order to move forward. And we've got to give permission so it doesn't feel like you're an imposter. It just feels like you're trying things out.
You're engaged in a process.
And some of it is going to suck. And by the way, just so we're clear, some of it is going to suck forever. That is, some things you'll probably never, you'll try and you'll say, you know what, knitting is not for me. I'm not going to invest enough time and effort into being excellent. There are other areas where I want to put my time. And I think that you can get to that point only if you try and you allow yourself to fail, and we allow each other to fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think you hit on that notion of you can be good at a variety of different things, right? We hear a lot about growth mindset and grit, which can both get used in really unproductive ways. But really, it's about thinking through that if you devote time and energy into something, you can get better at it.
Yes.
You might not know it now, but you at some point will, right? I keep thinking about situated learning communities and how you go from marginal participation into the center of that. And of course, you're going to feel like an imposter as you're moving into and towards that center. But if it's a really well-constructed learning community, like those things are going to be mitigated, right?
And I think the key word that you use there, and I think is the most important solution on the way, both systemically, because we talk often about the fact that systemically, there are certain things that are systemic, and we need to take care of them systemically and not just individually. But also as individuals, especially at the beginning of our careers, we can't affect the system. It's not our role to affect the system. Our role is different. Our role is to survive and make a place for ourselves. And in that, it's about finding your community. And I think that community, that right community, is critical. I mean, we have a writing group. We haven't met in a while, and I'm aware. But we have a writing group.
Whoa! The judgment that you just...
That was not judgment. That was self-judgment.
Why are you... I'm not judging you. Why are you judging you?
I'm not
Let's have a check-in here. Why are you feeling judged?
Because I have not been a good colleague with that community.
You have been a fine colleague who is telling you that you're not a good one because it's not me.
I understand. It's me.
Stop.
Okay.
Give me your hand. Stop. Okay, continue.
All right.
Now that I've...
So, now that we've had an intervention, but...
Was that an intervention?
It felt like an intervention.
I think that was just me yelling.
Anyway, but finding the community where the people around you, especially when you're down, are telling you, are helping you reframe that reality. Because sometimes, I mean, the solution is always to reframe and say, have I failed? Or, as you just gave an example, right? Or how do I feel about it, and validating it and moving forward, right? But sometimes you need somebody else to help you reframe. That is a mentor, and I think communities are most helpful, where they can say to you, you know, check, I can think about a good colleague who once in a while would have this, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Everybody is better than me. I'm just faking it. I'm not making it kind of moment. And and the moment is, you know, you have a PhD. That's very few people in the world. You've got a position at a good university. That doesn't happen very often. Tenure-line position. That doesn't happen. That's even rarer. You are part of a select group, and you deserve to be here. And And you need that reframing from your community. And you need a mentor that will help you walk, a mentor or mentors who will help you walk from the side of that community into the center. Slowly. You don't have to be there. You don't have to be at the center. It's actually not useful to be in the center immediately.
Yeah, no. Well, and I think too, it's the point where there does come a point where you stop faking it.
Yeah.
And you're just
part of it,
and you're doing it. And the trick is recognizing when that happens and understanding that you're going to encounter this imposter phenomenon at a variety of different junctures, right? So if we're thinking about, oh my gosh, my university is adopting a new LMS, a learning management system, you're going to start feeling like an imposter again. Like when you're pulling in new technology, right? Like, why can't I do this? Right? If you switch jobs, like there's going to be, having been at 3 different institutions, like there's some commonalities between all of them, but specific systems, I still feel like an imposter in certain systems as I push to understand them.
Yeah.
Right? And so it doesn't go away. It's not like you wrestle with it
and then it's over.
And then it's done. It's ongoing. And really, I think for me, it's about just getting a sense of who am I? What do I want my work to be about? How does it connect back to my institution, et cetera, et cetera. So that's like one way that I've worked to develop for myself some ways to navigate those kind of cognitive distortions, right? Like someone posts something on Facebook that's nice about my class. How do I not go to a stupid space, right?
Yeah.
What are some ways that you find yourself setting up systems in your own head to negotiate that talk? What are some things you do?
The external things and internal things. And so in external things, I make sure I have a community around me of people I talk to on a regular basis. And inside that community, I feel supported and I can bring that up and somebody can call me on it and saying, why are you going down that road? Don't go down that road, right? That is incredibly helpful. And I have that professionally, but also socially. So I have people in my life that are not part of my academic world that help me check in. And that is important. And the third thing is that I do often very purposefully reframe. So when I get a rejection, or when I have an interview that wasn't successful, or when I have another experience that triggers that, I then sit and work through not just my emotions. So I let the emotional wave kind of crest because at that emotional moment, there's not much I can do. I just need to feel the feels. And after that, I kind of analyze, what did I do? What do I want to do? Is it even worth paying attention to? Or is it something that I need to say that it was a stupid feeling? We all get rejections. I got another rejection and it'll be just fine. And so that is a huge piece of my practice after any interaction. And the advantage and disadvantage of academic life is there's lots of opportunities. Every conference we apply to, every paper we send out, every book proposal or class we teach, there's always the potential for negative feedback, and there's always something to be not super happy about. And so that ability to start having the practice of letting the emotions run through and then do an analysis of what is the appropriate response and what is reframing that within, who I am, right? Going back to those, who do I want to be? How does this play into that? And move from there is incredibly useful. And also finding the positive and having the good feels about the positive. So, for example, today I had a positive. It's a stupid positive, but it's a positive.
Again, with the judgment, buddy.
No, because it's a little judgy. But I have a good colleague from a different university who is considerably more famous than I am. As in kind of world famous kind of thing. And he was interviewed on a podcast. I was interviewed on that podcast 4 episodes before him. So, winning. I told you it's stupid, but we gotta celebrate the stupid.
Whoa. I did not make a value judgment on that at all. So
it's a little petty. It's a little petty.
Is that petty? That's not petty.
But I'm good with that.
Like,
but we got to celebrate the wins.
A win is a win.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and like, I think for myself, going back to your notion of like building that community.
Yeah.
That's important, and thinking through how you leverage that community. Because I'm not a good vibes only guy. Have you noticed?
Yeah, I have.
But I
even Dan is laughing.
Even Dan is laughing. I'm constantly leveraging all that angst in order to engage in work that changes the things that I am angsty about. Is how I like to reframe that. But I as I'm thinking about imposter syndrome and the rejection that sometimes triggers that, one of the things that I have found really helpful is that I have folks where I can just make a statement. This rejection happened. I'm salty for the next 72 hours.
Yeah. And you've got to give yourself the permission.
And like, and there's something about externalizing that and making that rejection not reside just in me. And I don't necessarily need a response. Like, I don't need a response to this rejection happened. I'm salty for 72 hours. I don't need I'm so sorry. I don't need I just need someone else knows.
Yes.
And like, that's just part of the process. And I'm going to be salty for 72 hours. Larry Mikuleski, one of my professors at Indiana, was always like, you can be upset about a rejection, but you give yourself 72 hours and then you figure out what's next. Like, what happens next? So for that one, I'm in hour 46.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
So I still got some time. I still got,
One of the advantage for me with mentoring is you see younger professionals, younger in not necessarily in age, but in experience, and you see how they're going through it, and it helps me see, and I'm helping them reframe, and that helps me too, right? And it's like, oh yeah, we did get that rejection. It's fine. It was revise and resubmit. This is what we do. But you can feel the feels. I mean, again, giving the permission for them to feel the feels. Let's talk next week and think about next steps. Because right now, just sit with it for a little while, because there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
and so
it's not like there's an appeal process for this, right? Like,
no, there isn't.
There's mentally an appeal process. Like,
yes.
Can I reframe this? Can I rethink what is the as we're thinking about ways to combat this imposter syndrome, one of the things that we can do is really think through what are the objective and measurable evidences that I was competent. Like, if you get a revise and resubmit, that's an investment on behalf of that editorial board in your writing,
your work.
in your ideas. What are they asking you to do in order to elevate your writing, your ideas, the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And even if it's a rejection, people still have spent time reading that. And as long as you have, in full faith, submitted something within the scope of that journal and not just, you chopped out a chapter from your dissertation,
We've
which
had that
has happened
conversation before.
right? As long as you've made a full faith effort, chances are you're going to get some actionable advice for how to turn that around. Simply because, journal publishing is kind of like dating. Sometimes they just don't work. Sometimes it's just not a match. But you always get feedback around, oh, this person didn't work.
Mhm.
I'm actually looking for this. Like
Mhm.
the same thing happens there. So what are some of the objective and measurable pieces of evidence that you can leverage in order to think about what you're actually accomplishing in terms of what you want your career to be about?
And I wanna pick that up a little bit and say we talked a lot about publishing because it's the thing that comes to mind where we get a lot of rejection.
Mhm.
But publishing is not the only. It's not even the major part of our job. Neither
Yeah,
of us.
no.
It's a small, important, but less than 50% of our job right now. So the same thing goes for teaching or for anything else you do. And I once had one of my early mentors, informal mentor, not a formal mentor, but here at UNL, once talked about as we created the Reading Center that still exists, not involved anymore. He said, one of the things he said is, you've got to think about it this way, because the Reading Center is a center where we're teaching our students how to work with students who are struggling in reading and writing, and that's important work to teach our students and to help, by proxy, to help the community and to support kids. And he said something really interesting because we weren't generating necessarily a lot of research out of that reading center. We were focused on the doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important to us. But there was some pressure to produce some research based on that and be a little bit resisted. And he helped me resist that by saying, there are lots of ways to produce impact, and a journal article can help move research forward. But when you're really honest with yourself, sometimes it's like not every research article changes the world. Most of them don't. Most of them get very few readers.
Right.
But when you are working there with a future teacher who will teach for 20 years and will know that much better how to help struggling readers, or when that child is being helped and is on the right track with reading and writing, that is real impact on the world. And so what I'm saying is, don't narrow focus on research. Even if you have research as part of your appointment, remember, we have lots of ways to make impact on the world. And some of it is very visceral and very, very real, especially when we work with pre-service and in-service teachers. We really make a difference. And we have to focus on that as well and elevate it. And focus on the things we are successful, even there, because we can feel like imposters there as well.
Well, in particularly as I'm thinking about, so I was in the reading clinic 2 weeks ago, subbing.
Excellent.
For a tutor. And one of the things that I continue to struggle with as I've moved out of running my own reading clinic and not having opportunities to interface with elementary children very often is like, can I do what I'm teaching my students to do? Right? And so it was a really interesting experience to tutor a student who I had no connection with.
That's
and
hard.
Did not, it actually really wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Like it really wasn't. And the interesting piece was I was surrounded by students I had taught. Students who were in my lit block. And so there was this sense of, yep, rubber's gonna hit the road right now.
Yeah.
And it was fine. It was great. Like afterward, my former student who was sitting next to me was like, "You got through everything. I never get through everything." And I was like, "Yeah, because we got to move.
Yes,
there's certain things I
we
need
gotta
this."
Move. And I always, because I want to make sure they don't have imposter syndrome as a result of seeing a seasoned professional, is to say, just remember, I've been in this profession. When I talk about publication, for example, say to people, I've been in this world for 24 years. I've been writing for publications. You are in your first run at this. You can't expect to be here. This is one thing that my mentors did not talk to me about, which I now look back and it's like, that would have been helpful. Because I used to look at, I worked with Bob Calfee and he would just write. He would sit and he would just write and it looked like magic. And I realized, and it wasn't magic.
No.
Don't get me wrong. It was not magic. It was just experience. He had 40-something years of experience writing for publication. It gets easier. I will tell you, it does get easier. So once in a while, you have to say, yes, I can do this, and you will be able to. But remember, I have a lot more experience. I've worked with thousands of students before you,
Mhm.
or I've written, hundreds of things for publication. Not all of which have ever seen the light of day. And that's fine. But I've learned some things along the way, and I'm happy to teach you. And here are some opportunities to interact. But we do need, when we model, we also need to remind people that we've been doing this a lot longer than they have.
Well, and the most heartening thing to come out of that was that this particular student that I was teaching next to was like, I saw things that you had taught us. Like, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And you did that. And now I'm going to do that next time, because it enabled you to get your pace moving, right? So like, and I'm trying to figure out why that piece of feedback was more fortifying than the Facebook shout out in my head. And I don't have an answer there yet, but it's interesting.
It's more concrete and very specific to actual performance, I would argue.
I mean,
it's real instead of
yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna think that through, because like, because the other thing that I think we can do to kind of help when we're experiencing this imposter syndrome is to engage in that self-reflection. Like, where are you experiencing those tensions and why? And oftentimes that comes back to what are your core values in terms of the work that you do?
And sometimes for me, it's why do you care? So there are certain things. I care about feedback from my students. But when somebody that is fairly random is or I'm interacting and I feel like an imposter at a meeting, like university-wide or whatever, I go, do I really care if I'm an imposter here? It's not one of my main goals. I'm doing some service, I'm helping around, but it's not very important. So that going back not just to values, but to your own goals and how you see yourself professionally, there are certain places where I don't feel like I have a lot to contribute, and I sit back and I contribute when I can, and then I move on, and I try to disassociate with that as part of my core identity, and because that feeling is always there, right, in that new session or in a place where you don't know a lot. But part of that check is, do I care? When I really think about it.
Well, and also, not only do you care, but are you giving particular things weight, right?
Yeah.
Like, if we're thinking about end of semester student evals, if we think about what we're told those measure versus what they actually measure, it's kind of two different things. Because one is students' perceptions of their learning in your class, which is I
have a different perspective on the.
What's your perspective? Tell me more.
My perspective on student evaluation is it's determined about 85% by how much they like you, which is not a relevant measure necessarily. They are not really evaluating how much they've learned.
Right.
It's not even their perception of how much learning happened. It's their perception of how much of a connection they created with you. I'm not saying that connection is not important. It's an entry point to learning, but it's not the whole thing. So I have seen very effective instructors who were not very well liked, and I have seen people that were very well liked and got very high evaluations, but really did not provide a lot of content and a lot of things that students could use in their whatever they were doing next.
Well, and so
that we can do a whole thing about that.
Well, and I think you've hit on. I think we're thinking of it the same way, because I feel like in our student evals, learning gets confused with, did they like me or not?
Absolutely.
And so when I'm thinking about my teaching and thinking about, again, objective assessments, I'm careful to remember the limitations to that.
Yeah.
Right. And even in terms of the relationships that I build in my classroom, my evals don't really get at that. In fact, I'm doing a separate eval this year just to get at more actual actionable data for me to improve my teaching on. So not giving that as much weight, because I know some of my colleagues and my grad students who
can
just get devastated.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's the boundaries for what this is telling you.
Yeah.
Here's what you can take from it. but the rest of it, it's not measuring what you think it's measuring.
And there are ways to disassemble, and we can do a whole session about that. That might be an idea.
How to make sense of your student evals.
Yeah. How to not make sense. I don't know if it's worth a whole. I don't know. I've gone back and forth with that. There's some research about that, but
I mean,
I've been suspect of all of this.
I haven't found any research of them that are like, these are a great tool. They help us out.
Yeah.
Which is interesting that we are so institutionally invested in them.
Well, less so, actually. Our institution has gotten further and further away.
I mean, kind of, but not really. Like,
all right. That'll be for another time.
Another time. But like this does, so one of the other things that imposter syndrome can be mitigated by is DEI efforts.
Yes.
Because one of the things around DEI efforts are they're meant to make expectations of jobs, expectations of learning, and access to being able to do that work or that learning clear and explicit.
Yeah.
Right? So really thinking about when we're talking about mentoring grad students, what are we talking about? Are all of our grad students getting this bare minimum level of care, of mattering? And I think one of the discourses that often gets picked up around that is, oh, we need to trust our colleagues. Trust my colleagues to do what? I don't know what I'm trusting my colleagues to do.
Yeah. Clarity helps.
So it's not that I don't trust my colleagues, but I don't know what to trust them with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of those things where the lack of clarity, the lack of systemic support for that can create some imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And DEI efforts to systematize and ensure that every student gets this bare minimum amount of care and being clear about what that minimum amount of care is helps with that.
And that, again, going back to DEI, that people of color especially need a different kind of mentoring sometimes or additional. So it's not a system where it's one size fits all, because systemically these have been less clear, right? So you need overall clarity, but then you need systems of support that makes sure that the clarity is carried through, that there is a sense that the institution and the systems are actually serious about that clarity, because there's always that sense that there are unwritten rules, that we have written rules and there's supposedly clarity, but there's a story behind the story that is not being shared. And that's true of anybody. It's definitely true of students of color. It's definitely true of international students, where culture is different. So you need that clarity just to make sure that there's a sense about what are the expectations, and then what does it mean to meet them? What are the systems that are there to support you in meeting them and help you evaluate whether you're making progress?
Right. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind around DEI and imposter syndrome is what tangentially related to what you just stated is students who are of color, first gen, LGBTQIA plus, who are coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds, like their experiences of imposter syndrome are more amplified and more frequent. And if we're engaging in student-centered or new colleague-centered or just people-centered ways of doing things, we have to be able to prep for that. We have to be able to respond to that. And part of that response is being aware of our own, when we are feeling like imposters, and what are we doing to navigate that, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, given the statistics, 82% of people at some point, regardless of whether they're in academia or not, are going to experience, imposter syndrome. So it's something worth talking about. It's something worth thinking through and acknowledging. And only when we acknowledge it can we figure out how to work through it, right? So hopefully in this episode, we have given you some insights into how we navigate that and maybe some strategies that you can use in your own as you're navigating it. But, you know, take our advice for what it is, because we are not that kind of doctor. We're just two guys who talk about things that are important to us.
Talk about an imposter syndrome and the phrase that
Oh no!
enshrines that.
Again. Remember Josie Fox.
Yes.
This is my grandson. He's a doctor, but he's not that kind of doctor. It's where the name comes from.
Yeah.
I'm not being an imposter. I'm claiming my space.
Yeah.
Articulating my boundaries. This is my branding. I am not a medical doctor. I don't have a psychology. That's a lie. I don't have an MD in psychiatry or an advanced degree in psychology. That's not me. So, all right. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.